He found her curled beneath a blanket of leaves, shivering, silent, and wearing a bracelet that cost more than his entire truck. No ID, no shoes, just a look in her eyes that said, "Don't ask who I am." The sheriff wanted her taken in. The town wanted her gone. But he couldn't walk away. Who was this woman? And why did someone with that kind of wealth end up lost, alone, and terrified in the woods? If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to disappear and what it takes to truly be seen, stay with us. And if this story stirs something in you, leave a thought, share it, or just stick around. There's more than meets the eye. The air smelled like gasoline and pine. Ethan Carter had spent the afternoon wrestling with a faulty alternator under a battered Dodge at the edge of his garage lot, which bled into the woods beyond. It was almost dark. He wiped his hands on a rag, ready to pack up, when he caught a flicker of movement from the tree line. At first, he thought it was a deer. Then the shape stumbled forward. A woman, barefoot, soaked. Her dress, what was left of it, was torn lace and mud. She clutched nothing. Her arms hung loose at her sides. Her hair stuck to her face in wet strands. Her eyes were wide, glassy, lost, but locked on him. Ethan dropped the rag. "Ma'am," he called out, slow and steady like approaching a wounded animal. "Are you hurt?" She didn't answer, just kept walking. He moved toward her, palms open. She didn't flinch, just kept her gaze fixed on him like he might vanish. When she finally collapsed to her knees on the gravel, Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. 10 minutes later, he was speeding down Route 33 in his truck, the woman wrapped in his flannel jacket beside him, barely conscious. She hadn't said a word. She just stared out the windshield, trembling. At Blue Ridge Medical Center, the ER nurse raised an eyebrow when Ethan carried her in. "What happened?" "Found her in the woods," Ethan said. "She was wearing this." He gestured to the soiled wedding dress. Didn't have shoes, didn't say her name. They wheeled her in. Ethan waited in the corridor, arms crossed, stomach tight. He wasn't the type to involve himself. Folks around Blue Ridge minded their own. But something about that girl's silence, how deliberate it felt, gnawed at him. A nurse came out 20 minutes later. "She's stable. You're not family, so we can't say more." He was about to leave when he heard her voice. Barely a whisper. "Car, chase, wedding, cliff." He stepped closer to the door, but it shut in his face. Outside the hospital, the night had gone still. The streetlights cast long shadows. Ethan leaned against the hood of his truck, watching his breath fog in the air. He couldn't shake her voice, the broken rhythm of those words. A wedding, a chase, a cliff. Something had gone terribly wrong. Later that night, the hospital submitted a routine report to the sheriff's office standard for unidentified patients. The front desk clerk didn't notice the SUV idling across the street. Its headlights were off. The driver, unseen behind tinted glass, sat motionless, staring at the ER doors. Ethan returned to his place past midnight. He sat at the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold, staring at the ring of grime beneath his nails. He could still smell the rain in her hair. She hadn't asked for help, but that didn't matter. People didn't end up barefoot in the woods by accident, not in a wedding dress. He reached for his phone, opened the browser, typed in the words, slowly missing, Bride Blue Ridge, Virginia. Nothing came up. She didn't exist. Not yet. In a town where everyone knew everyone. A stranger that quiet made the loudest sound. He didn't know why he cared, only that he couldn't stop picturing her face. She hadn't looked back when they wheeled her away, but her eyes had said something else. The fluorescent lights above Harper buzzed softly, steady and cold, as she blinked against the stillness of the room. The sheets beneath her were stiff, tucked too tightly. She turned her head slowly. The nurse standing nearby had soft eyes, but her movements were detached routine. "You're safe here," the woman said. "You've been through something. Don't try to speak yet." Harper swallowed. Her throat was raw. She couldn't place where she was. But her body remembered something her mind refused to bring up. Every time her thoughts brushed near the words, wedding or cliff. Her chest tightened. Her palms started to sweat. The nurse adjusted her IV and left quietly. The room fell silent again. The only sound was the faint hum of machines and the wind tapping against the window pane. Outside, Ethan Carter sat in the ER waiting room with his elbows on his knees, watching the second hand circle the wall clock. He'd already answered the nurse's questions. He'd told the intake officer everything he knew, which wasn't much. She was alone, he said, wearing a wedding dress, no shoes, looked like she'd been running a while. The sheriff's deputy, who arrived not long after, was a thick-set man in his 50s, with a Virginia Tech cap and a skeptical stare. "You said she didn't have ID?" "Nope." Ethan replied. The deputy scratched his chin. "We get lost hikers sometimes. People do weird things before breakdowns." Ethan frowned. "You think she just wandered out like that, in a torn dress? I think, if she were in real danger, she'd have come with injuries that matched the story." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "She didn't give a story." "That's kind of the point," the deputy said, rising. "When she talks, maybe we'll have something. For now, this doesn't rise to an investigation." He walked off without another word. Ethan watched him go, jaw tightening. Back upstairs. Harper was sitting up now, weak but more alert. The doctor had stepped out, and the room was quiet again. Ethan knocked gently and opened the door just enough to peer in. "I brought some clothes and something to eat," he said, holding up a bag. "They wouldn't let me stay, but I figured I'd try." She didn't answer at first, just looked at the bag, then at him. There was something in her face, not exactly fear, but a deep wariness, as if every question might be a trap. He walked in slowly, placed the bag on the side table, and sat on the edge of the visitor's chair. "I don't know if you remember anything, but if you need anything, someone to call, or just someone to sit there, I'm not in a rush." After a long pause, she reached for the sandwich with shaky hands. She took a small bite, then held it, as if chewing took too much effort. When she finally spoke, her voice was dry and deliberate. "I don't know who I am," she said, "but I know I can't let them find me." Ethan didn't push. He just nodded, absorbing the weight of what she'd said. "Who's them?" he asked gently, but she only looked down and shook her head. "They'll take me back." Her knuckles were white against the edge of the blanket. "Back at the nurse's station." The security guard on the night shift yawned as he scanned the mainframe activity log. He almost skipped the red warning near the bottom, "Failed access attempt. Internal login credentials flagged as unknown." Someone had tried to open a locked file in the patient database. The attempt was made from one of the administrative terminals. He squinted, clicked further, but the screen froze, then rebooted. By the time he walked to check the physical terminal, the room was empty and dark. Outside, Ethan walked toward his truck, hands in his jacket pockets. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He wasn't anyone special. He fixed cars, paid his bills on time, had no record. But something about her silence was a call he couldn't ignore. She wasn't just lost. She wasn't just scared. She was hunted. He started the engine, headlights cutting into the mist that now hovered over the road. He drove back to his house quietly, but his thoughts kept circling like buzzards. Something had broken loose in that woman's life, and tonight, it had crossed into his. The hospital lights disappeared in the rearview mirror. Inside, room 212, Harper didn't sleep. She sat upright, staring at the plastic bracelet on her wrist, tracing the numbers. There was no name, and in that absence, a part of her started to return. It was the third morning since Harper had walked out of the woods, and the fog still hung low over Horseshoe Ridge like something waiting. Ethan stood at the porch railing with a mug of black coffee in hand, watching mist curl between the trees. Behind him, through the cracked window, he could hear Harper moving in the small guest room. Light footsteps, careful, like she didn't quite trust the floor to hold her. He hadn't asked questions. Not yet. She barely spoke, and when she did, it came in pieces like someone trying to put together a song they used to know. Later that afternoon, while sorting through a box of old garage parts in the barn behind the house. Harper found it. A nylon pouch, no bigger than a playing card sleeve, tucked into the lining of the wedding dress Ethan had saved from the hospital's disposal bag. She stood there holding it, motionless. Inside was a single metallic card, silver, smooth. No name, no logo, just an embedded chip and the text authorized level SE Rochh. She showed it to Ethan. He turned it over in his calloused hands. "Looks like a corporate badge," he said. "Something high level. You think it's yours?" Harper didn't answer. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes focused not on the card, but on something behind it, something that hadn't fully returned yet. Ethan took her to a flea market electronics booth he knew off Pinewood Avenue. The guy who ran it, Walt, was a retiree who fixed modems and once claimed to have built a homemade radio strong enough to reach Canada. Walt examined the card under a small USB scanner hooked to an ancient Dell laptop. The reader let out a jarring beep, then froze. "Whoa," Walt muttered. "That's a government-grade encryption layer. I've only seen this kind of lockout on defense contracts, military or something above my pay grade." On the screen, bold red letters flashed restricted corporate access, white serpent. Harper leaned in. The words meant nothing at first. Then something clicked in her chest, not in her mind, not quite. Her breath shortened. She blinked rapidly. "I've seen that," she whispered. "On a garage wall, a car showroom, something with glass walls and white marble floors. There was a snake logo wrapped around a flower." Ethan didn't know what to say. He waited. "And there was a man," she added, more to herself than to him, in a gray suit. With eyes that didn't blink much, Walt watched her with cautious curiosity, then stepped away like he'd touched something electric. Back at the cabin, Harper sat on the floor, legs folded, the silver card in her palm. She turned it over and over like a coin before a bet. Ethan broke the silence. "We should take this to the sheriff. If someone's looking for you, they'll have answers." "No," she said sharply, more than he expected. "If you take this to them, it won't help. It'll bring them here." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Who's them?" "Harper." She didn't reply, just stared at the wood stove. Then she said, quieter, "They don't want to find me because I'm lost. They want to find me because I remember something I shouldn't." Later, Ethan went outside to check the door locks again, more out of habit than suspicion. The night air was thick. The gravel path was soft from last night's rain. He glanced down and froze. Footprints, heavy ones, booted, fresh, not his, not hers. They led from the edge of the woods to the back of the cabin and then disappeared into the dark. He scanned the tree line, heart thumping, no sound, no light, just the trees, standing still as stone. Inside, Harper hadn't moved from the rug. She held the card tightly now, like it was the only thing that still tethered her to something real. She didn't notice Ethan return, didn't hear the door close. But when she finally looked up at him, her voice was flat and steady. "They already know where I am, Ethan. The question is, how much time do we have before they come to take me back?" The storm passed overnight, leaving a damp quiet that clung to the edges of Ethan's small house. The ground around the garage was soft again, still holding the imprint of those strange boot prints near the back door. Harper hadn't asked about them, and Ethan hadn't offered anything. She was holding on to enough shadows already. That morning, Harper asked to go through the basement. He led her downstairs without much thought. The space was part garage, part graveyard of broken gadgets and secondhand furniture. The air smelled like oil and forgotten wood. He flipped the switch. Yellow light flickered once, then held. Harper moved slowly between boxes, running her hands along the surfaces like they might speak to her. She opened one crate filled with frayed wires and closed it again without a word. Then she spotted an old milk crate near the far wall, half covered with a tarp. Inside were 3 photo albums Ethan had bought from a flea market a few weeks earlier. Estate sale, leftovers, he'd told himself. People's lives folded into pages, sold for a few bucks. He hadn't looked through them in detail, just thought they might be worth something to someone someday. Harper pulled out the second album and opened it near the middle. She froze. The photo showed a white sports car, sleek and sharp against a glossy marble driveway. The image was slightly faded, but clear enough to see a logo near the front grille, a silver serpent coiled around a flower. Her fingers trembled as she traced it. "I've seen that car," she whispered. Ethan stepped closer. "That symbol on the badge," she added, looking up, voice tighter now. "It was parked near a glass building. I think I was inside, and there was a man." She didn't finish. Ethan took the photo and slid it into a Ziploc bag. That afternoon, he drove her to Lynchburg, a 40-minute ride south through the back roads, where his old friend Jesse ran a restoration shop for luxury and vintage cars. Jesse, all grease-stained boots and 5-day stubble, took one look at the photo and whistled low. "That's a customized Etra 9 Veloci. They only made 10. And that snake, that's a corporate stamp from Preston Motors, family-owned outfit. They debuted this model 2 years ago at a private showcase in Richmond. Big names, East Coast elite." Harper stood silent. Jesse continued. "Most of these cars were handed out to investors or their kids. Think hedge funds, old money, the type that don't show up in People magazine." Ethan's mind began to thread pieces together. Later that night, after Harper had gone to bed, he searched the name Preston Motors on his laptop, then cross-referenced with the car model. It didn't take long. A flurry of articles from the past week filled his screen. Miles Preston, CEO of Preston Motors, postpones lavish wedding to Harper Sinclair. Sinclair heiress vanishes days before private resort ceremony. No statement from the family, no comments from the groom, no confirmed sighting since the rehearsal dinner. Ethan sat back. If that was true, if Harper really was that Harper, then the question shifted from who she was to why she ran, and who wanted her back. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. The only light came from the porch, where a moth kept hitting the bulb. The next morning, just before dawn, Ethan stepped out to check the mailbox and nearly missed it. A plain manila envelope, no return address, wedged under the front door. Inside was a printout of the same car photo Harper had found only now. A slash had been drawn across her face in red ink. Neat, deliberate. He brought it inside without a word. Harper was in the kitchen, barefoot in his old sweatshirt, staring out the window with her hands around a mug. He didn't tell her. Not yet. The morning air was crisp, laced with the scent of damp leaves and exhaust from Ethan's old truck, idling in the driveway. He stood by the kitchen counter, stuffing a sandwich into a brown paper bag, half focused on the parts run he needed to make in town. Across the room, Harper sat at the small wooden table, nursing a mug of weak coffee. Her eyes followed his every movement, but her hands trembled slightly as they cupped the warm ceramic. The landline rang, a sharp, sudden sound that cut through the quiet like a blade. Ethan froze, wiped his hands on his jeans, and picked it up. Carter residence. Silence. Then, a man's voice, slow, even unfamiliar. "She doesn't belong there." The line crackled. "You don't understand what you've pulled into. Get her out of Blue Ridge, or everything you know will burn." Ethan didn't speak. His throat tightened. "I'm not saying this twice." Click. He turned slowly. Harper had heard every word. She hadn't moved, but her knuckles were white around the mug. "He knows I'm here," she said quietly, voice tight but not trembling, "and he wants me to vanish without leaving a single echo." Ethan stepped over, gently took the phone from its cradle, and unplugged it. The plastic cord dropped limp. "Do you recognize the voice?" he asked. "No, but I know the tone." "That's not a warning. It's an order disguised as concern." He nodded once, more to himself than to her. That same quiet resolve he always wore when something in the engine block refused to work. Later that afternoon, he tried calling in a favor his old friend Alex, now a lieutenant in Charlottesville PD. They'd worked a volunteer fire line together once during a forest blaze years back. Alex's response was sharp. "No active missing persons case, no reported crime, unless you have proof of a threat. My hands are tied." She was found in the woods in a wedding dress. And now she's alive and talking. Alex snapped. That's not a case. That's your guest. Click. Ethan leaned back against the porch rail and watched a squirrel dart up the walnut tree, like the world wasn't unraveling behind him. The systems weren't built for ghosts. That evening, Harper wandered the house, slow and deliberate. She ran her fingers along the bookshelf, the worn grain of the dining table, the scratches on the hardwood near the back door, looking, perhaps, for some anchor, or maybe something to pull loose. In the kitchen, she stopped in front of an old photo frame, Ethan's family, his father in uniform, holding a fire helmet with a small boy at his side. "Was this your dad?" she asked. "Yeah," Ethan said, wiping down the counter. "Retired as a captain. Died 6 years ago." She kept looking at the photo. "Why did you stay here? Blue Ridge is small." He shrugged. "Because not everyone gets to come back to where they belong. Some of us are still lucky enough to recognize it." She didn't answer, but that night, in the spare bedroom, she spread out a blank notebook and began writing. Fragments, shapes, a white hallway, the echo of footsteps, the name Evelyn, a man with a glass of bourbon, someone's hand on her wrist, holding her still while others watched. She drew what looked like a ballroom, marked exits, labeled the flower arrangements in the corners, just in case it all slipped away again. When Ethan walked past her room an hour later, he didn't knock. He only paused long enough to see the pages on the bed, half sketch, half memory, and her fingers gripping the pen like it was the only weapon she had. He went back to the living room, turned off the porch light, but the doorbell rang anyway. A single chime, then nothing. Ethan opened the door slowly, cautiously, no footsteps. No sound, only the hum of insects and the weight of night pressing in. At his feet, a wooden box. He bent down, lifted the lid. Inside was a gold-plated snake, curled around a jet-black velvet square, cold, ornate, and unmistakably deliberate. He stared at it for a long moment before carrying it inside. He didn't need to ask who it was meant for. The gold snake glinted under the kitchen light, its curved form resting atop the velvet base like a silent accusation. Ethan turned the box in his hands again, then noticed it small, almost invisible, etched into the wooden bottom in faint serif letters. Sinclair Gardens, dedication gift, 2022. He read it aloud. Harper stood by the counter, arms folded tightly across her chest, her gaze hardening. "That was the venue," she said. "I didn't remember the name before, but that's where the wedding was supposed to be?" Ethan nodded. "Then we start there." By noon, they were on the road, heading east on Route 29 through rolling Virginia countryside. The fall colors had begun to edge into the trees, but neither of them paid much attention. The silence in the truck wasn't cold, just thick, filled with things neither had words for yet. Fairfax County Administrative Archives stood behind a government plaza, flanked by a parking garage and a line of maple trees that had dropped their leaves like forgotten promises. Ethan walked in, wearing a pressed button-down, hair slicked back, clipboard in hand. "Facility event manager," he told the clerk. "We're pulling reference for a site assessment." It worked. Within 20 minutes, they were in the back room, surrounded by rows of folded blueprints, property surveys, and archived event permits. Harper sat at the wide metal table, flipping carefully through a folder labeled Sinclair Gardens, Outdoor Configurations, 2022. Her fingers stopped on a layout marked North Lawn, Wedding Install, May. She traced the walkway down to a shaded alcove labeled Bridal Suite. Then she saw it. A staff list printed in faded ink, rows of names, and one circled faintly in pencil. Becca Rollins, Consultant, Floral Design. The moment hit like the breath being knocked out of her. Not a clear memory, but something worse, a physical reaction. There was a mirror, she whispered, tall, surrounded by white roses, and someone behind me, a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't warm. Ethan leaned in. "Becca, I don't know, but she was there." I think she knew what was happening that day. She was calm, too calm. They left with scanned copies of the blueprints and staff list. As they stepped out into the afternoon haze, Harper noticed a dark SUV parked 3 spots down, engine off. A woman with light brown hair sat inside, a newspaper open in her lap, but her eyes weren't moving. They were watching. Harper stared back. The woman shifted in her seat, lifted the paper an inch higher, as if remembering too late to act casual. Harper nudged Ethan. "Don't look now, but we're being followed." By the time Ethan turned, the SUV was already pulling away. They drove home in tense silence, scanning every car that seemed to linger too long in a lane or brake too slowly at a stop sign. When they reached Horseshoe Ridge, Ethan double-checked all the locks before even letting Harper out of the truck. That night, with the rain coming soft and slow again, Harper sat at the dining table, blueprint unfolded before her, a yellow pencil tapping beside the marked bridal suite. "I'm scared they'll get to you," she said finally. Ethan looked up from across the room. "They already tried." She stood, walked to the window, arms wrapped tightly around her ribs. "You don't get it," she said. "If the wrong people find out I'm alive, they won't file papers or call lawyers. They'll make me disappear in a way no one will question, because I stopped playing the part they gave me." Ethan didn't argue, but something in his eyes shifted. A flicker of doubt, not about her, but about the battle they were choosing to fight alone. "You ever think maybe the truth can't win in their world?" he asked. Harper turned. Her voice was steady. "That's why we don't fight in their world." It was past midnight when her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. She opened it, expecting more warnings, more vague threats, but it was a photo. Ethan, asleep in his armchair. His head tilted back, a book resting on his chest. The photo was taken from outside the window, close enough to catch the reflection of the curtains. Harper's blood went cold. She didn't speak. She walked quietly down the hall, the phone in her hand. She stood in the doorway, watching him breathe. Ethan didn't say much on the drive. He kept his eyes on the road, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the emergency brake like a quiet habit. Harper sat beside him, arms crossed, a folded jacket in her lap. They'd packed light just enough for a couple days. The air in the truck felt tight, like something waiting to be said, but neither brave enough to say it. May lived above an old bookstore on Old Baltimore Road, the kind of street that had outlived its own traffic. The wooden stairs creaked under their feet, but she didn't bother greeting them at the door. It was open. She was waiting. May Preston. No relation wasn't warm, but she wasn't cold either. Her eyes, sharp behind square glasses, sized Harper up with one look that said she'd already made several calculations. "You're the girl from the garden story," she said plainly. Harper didn't flinch. "I suppose I am." May gestured toward the kitchen. "Sit. Speak like you're not afraid of your own words." They sat at a chipped formica table while the kettle hissed softly on the stove. Ethan tried to offer some version of what they knew, but May held up a hand and cut to the marrow. "Do you remember who signed your marriage license?" she asked Harper. "I never signed it," Harper replied. "Someone tried to make me." May studied her for a long second. Then she left the room and returned with a small leather-bound notebook. The spine cracked, corners softened with age. She flipped through it until she reached March. This was my own copy, kept during my years with the Federal Records Indexing Office. I logged every license that passed through our division between D, C, and 3 adjoining counties. She laid the notebook flat on the table and tapped one entry, Miles Preston, license approval, March 9th. The bride's name blacked out with ink. Not redacted, removed. Harper leaned forward, breath shallow. Why would they do that? May didn't answer right away. She flipped the page, then back again, eyes narrowing, because someone wanted the paperwork to exist, without the person. Ethan spoke for the first time since they'd arrived. "What does that mean in practice?" May looked at him. "It means someone intended for the marriage to be traceable for legal leverage, but not challengeable. If Harper disappeared, legally, or otherwise, no one could prove coercion because there'd be no trail that she was ever involved. Harper stood. She took a few steps toward the window, then turned back. I remember the night before, a room, too white, too quiet, and a woman, not kind, not angry, just precise. She slid a contract across the table, said it was standard for the estate, said it guaranteed my security. "Did you read it?" May asked. I tried. She took it back after the first page and told me I didn't need to see more. Ethan looked up. "What did you do?" I refused to sign. And then she paused. Then I woke up in the back of a car. The dress was dirty. My hands were scratched. My phone was gone. Someone drove me halfway into the woods and left me there. I think they expected I wouldn't find my way out. Silence dropped heavy over the table. May slowly closed the notebook and rose. She walked to the rotary phone near the hallway and dialed from memory. After 2 rings, someone picked up. Her voice dropped, calm but firm. "I need a search run on a female applicant attached to the Preston Sinclair license, filed March 9th, 2022. Something's been scrubbed, and I think it wasn't voluntary." A pause. "I know who's behind it. I just need to prove she ever existed." She hung up and turned back. "Give me 24 hours, May said. "If they're erasing you, I'll dig you back out." Harper didn't smile, but her jaw set differently, like something inside had stopped shaking. Ethan walked to the window. The bookstore across the street was closing up for the night, lights flickering out one by one. But in the corner of the alley, under a broken street lamp, a car idled for a moment too long. Kingswell Hotel towered above the narrow D.C. Avenue like a marble-clad monument to silence and power. Built into the folds of the diplomatic district, it was where senators drank behind closed curtains, and billion-dollar mergers happened over chilled oysters. Harper adjusted her coat and straightened her hair as she stood beside Ethan at the revolving glass doors. They stepped in. Everything about the lobby gleamed white marble beneath their shoes, chandeliers hanging like frozen rain above, and gold trim outlining every surface. The hum of string music floated in from the lounge, refined and distant. Guests murmured over cocktails, but when Harper crossed the threshold and her heels touched that marble, something shifted. The room hushed. A woman behind the front desk stiffened mid-motion. Another glanced up from her computer and then froze entirely. At the center of the reception podium stood a woman in a deep gray suit, Ramona Lang, Kingswell's senior guest liaison for over 2 decades. She recognized Harper instantly. Her jaw clenched. Her hands dropped to her sides. Then she walked forward, slow and deliberate. "Miss Sinclair," she said, voice tight. "You shouldn't be here." "I think I should." Harper replied, "I have questions." Ramona lowered her voice. "You don't understand. They signed the papers. Everything's been finalized. Your name, it's not supposed to come back into this building." Ethan stepped forward. "What does that mean?" Finalized by who and for what, Ramona didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the phone beneath the counter and pressed a single button. Her words were calm, robotic. "She's here." The air around them thickened. 2 suited men by the elevator lobby adjusted their stance. Harper felt her throat go dry. Ethan's voice came low. "We leave. Now." They backed out, quiet but fast. Harper's fingers gripped Ethan's arm as they exited the lobby, eyes darting to every movement. Just as the doors slid shut behind them, she turned. There, along the side hallway near the banquet rooms, hung a framed portrait nearly 4 feet wide, a photograph, clearly staged, clearly expensive. Harper and Miles, arm in arm, both smiling, but her eyes were wrong. Even in the photo, they didn't look forward. They looked inward, like she'd already left. The cab ride back to Baltimore was thick with silence. Harper stared out the window. The skyline passed like a shadow. "I remember," she whispered finally. "The morning of the wedding. I was supposed to sign a second document relinquishing my controlling interest in Sinclair Holdings. They told me it was ceremonial, that the marriage would simplify asset consolidation. Ethan didn't interrupt. But I refused. Not just the paper, the whole damn thing. I stayed in the car and locked the door. I saw Miles pacing outside the chapel entrance. I never stepped out. Then someone got in the car from the back seat. Her voice broke. I thought it was a driver. I blacked out. Ethan turned to her. So they tried to marry you without you. They tried to take everything using my signature and a ceremony they staged for cameras that weren't allowed to publish. She let the thought settle. But if they thought I was gone, they wouldn't expect me to return. As they pulled into Old Baltimore Road, Harper leaned forward. Something was wrong. The door to May's building, usually kept locked with 2 deadbolts, stood wide open. They climbed the steps quickly. The apartment door, too, was ajar. Inside, the couch cushions were overturned, drawers open, papers scattered across the floor. No sign of May. May, Ethan called, voice tight. It's us. Nothing. In the center of the table, the ceramic teapot Harper had seen that morning was tipped sideways, still warm at the base. She set it upright, eyes scanning for anything, any note, any clue. Then she saw it. Tucked beneath the pot's base was a folded check, the paper slightly damp from condensation. Ethan opened it. $1 million, drawn from a holding company based in Delaware. No name, only a note, printed in neat serif font across the bottom corner. Silence is survival. Harper stared at the check, then to the empty apartment, then to the city lights flickering beyond the window. The house felt colder than before, not just in temperature, but in how the walls seemed to retreat, like they were holding their breath. Harper sat at the edge of the kitchen chair, staring at the check. The numbers meant nothing to her, but the note at the bottom, it hummed with something old, something hungry. Ethan swept the hallway and bedrooms. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks, just drawers left open, pillows tossed aside, May's favorite shawl still hanging by the coat hook, untouched. He returned to the kitchen with a clenched jaw. No blood, no struggle, he said, but her water glass is still warm. They called the police. Oh, a calm dispatcher voice on the other end said May might have stepped away voluntarily, that no break-in had been reported by neighbors, and unless there were signs of criminal activity, there wasn't much they could do. Harper listened with the phone pressed to her cheek, her knuckles white. When she hung up, her eyes didn't meet Ethan's. I'm the reason she's gone, she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. You're the reason she cared. He stepped aside, pulling out his phone. Jesse still works with the Lynchburg traffic control grid. Let me see if he can access street cam data from Baltimore. While Ethan paced, Harper wandered back to the den. The room had been ransacked, but something about the old fireplace drew her attention. She reached behind the narrow metal grate and felt a latch. It gave slightly. Inside was a thin leather pouch one May had once said she used when paper was still stronger than code. Inside were copies of the Sinclair family registry. But something was off. Harper's name didn't appear as Harper Sinclair. Instead, it was coded as HS2, a format used for internal database tracking. The entry beside it was starker: legal status voided, internal order, non-public directive. She blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, as if trying to release a sound, but unsure what sound belonged to grief. I'm not dead, she murmured, her voice brittle. But I've been erased. She turned to Ethan. They didn't just take my money. They took my name, my place in the family, my right to exist. Ethan moved beside her, read the line in silence, then looked to her face. He didn't speak. His silence felt like steadiness, not absence. Then Harper whispered something more, something from further back. She remembered Evelyn. The stepmother had leaned into her ear, voice as soft as velvet and just as suffocating. Names are power, she'd said. If yours disappears, so do your rights. Don't try to resurface. Harper, because if you do, they'll bury you again deeper this time. It had sounded like a threat back then, but now it was prophecy. Just then, Ethan's phone buzzed. He answered immediately. Jesse's voice came through, hushed, I got something. A black SUV, same model as the one seen outside the hospital, was recorded heading out of Baltimore 3 hours ago. Harper leaned closer, pressing her ear near the speaker. It didn't go far. Jesse continued. It passed Route 50 and cut north, last seen near McLean. There was a pause. Jesse's tone dropped lower. Also, May's phone pinged once. Just one signal burst right outside the Sinclair estate. Then it went dark, dead silent. Just 2 minutes. Then gone. Harper's face drained of color. They took her home, she said, almost to herself. Not to hers. To theirs. She didn't look back, but Ethan saw her spine straighten, like something inside her had just turned rigid with clarity. The morning haze clung low over McLean as Ethan pulled the car to a quiet stop along a side road flanked by tall hedges. From here, the Sinclair estate loomed invisible but unmistakable, protected by acres of woods and a wrought iron gate, the kind you couldn't talk your way through. Surveillance cameras blinked silently above the stone pillars. The estate didn't welcome visitors. It didn't need to. People came when called. "We're not getting in through the front," Ethan said. Harper stared out the window. Her fingers toyed nervously with the sleeve of her sweater, but her voice stayed even. There used to be a greenhouse behind the orchid fields. Sometimes the staff used it to nap or hide things. Ethan reached into the duffel bag in the back seat and pulled out a drone lightweight, palm-sized, with a modified range extender he'd soldered together back in Blue Ridge. "If they haven't updated their spectrum blockers," he muttered, "this might give us a peek." They launched it from inside the car. The feed shimmered onto Ethan's phone first trees, then the manor's main structure, a sweeping Southern-style house with tall white columns and marble stairs. Beyond it was the greenhouse, older and partially covered in climbing vines. To its side, nestled between a service shed and a garden wall, was the structure Harper had described. There. Her voice caught. "That little cottage. Evelyn locked me in it once. Said no girl with a temper could be trusted in public view." The words landed soft, but Harper's eyes hardened. "I was 7. The feed zoomed closer, showing barred windows and an old security pad that looked like it hadn't been updated in years. Ethan noted the back wall was near a wooded patch, an access point, if they moved carefully. They drove back in silence, returning to a modest hotel in Alexandria. It was the kind of place business travelers forgot by the second night, perfect for disappearing into inside the room. Harper sat by the window, watching the blurred traffic outside. Ethan unpacked gear quietly, giving her space. Then she spoke. "My father used to braid my hair when I was little, every Sunday morning before church. He made it look awful lumpy, uneven, but I liked the way his hands shook. It meant he was trying." She paused. But something shifted. After the Preston deal, he stopped showing up to school recitals. He barely looked me in the eye. She wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve, not bothering to hide the tears. "I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was a dividend, something to leverage. I didn't walk away from my wedding. I ran before they sold me whole." Ethan didn't offer advice, no reassurances, just reached out, slow and steady, and rested his hand on hers. The moment stretched between them quiet, real, and this time, Harper didn't pull away. Later that night, the hotel room was dim. The TV murmured in the background, but neither of them paid it any mind. Harper sat cross-legged on the floor, scribbling onto a pad maps, names, routes, while Ethan cleaned the drone for another flight. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps. Harper froze. Ethan turned his head slowly from across the room. They exchanged a look. Then Ethan reached for the bat he'd tucked beside the doorframe. He pulled the door open. No one stood outside. Just a black envelope resting neatly on the floor. Harper knelt to pick it up. Inside was a single photograph, grainy but clear. Ethan, caught in profile, entering the police precinct in Baltimore 2 days ago. Underneath it, scrawled in jagged red ink, "Anyone who stands beside you will lose everything." She held the note in both hands, but it was Ethan who spoke first, his voice low and steady behind her. "So now they know we're not running." Harper didn't answer. but something in the way her shoulders squared said she'd never been clearer. The late morning light cut thin slits through the tall hedges around the Sinclair estate. Ethan pulled the rented utility van into the service entrance behind the greenhouse, where deliveries and staff entered without ceremony. Jesse had arranged the permits, uniforms, even the invoice folder labeled Sanitaire Plus, Executive Suite Cleanup. Nobody asked questions when the paperwork looked expensive, inside the van. Harper adjusted the collar of the gray blouse Jesse had picked out. Her hair was pinned back, her face plain. She looked like someone no one would remember after an hour. That was the point. "You've got 20 minutes, Max," Ethan said quietly, sliding a small earpiece into her hand. "The gardener said the glass conference room faces east. You'll hear them before they see you." Harper gave a slight nod, then stepped out, clipboard in hand. Her legs trembled under her slacks, but her pace stayed even. The staff entrance was unguarded, either confidence or carelessness. She walked through a corridor of pale stone, turned right into a narrow service hall, and reached the side garden. From there, the glass conference room stretched out like a pristine fishbowl. Inside were Evelyn Sinclair, Miles Preston, and a man in a navy suit, Sinclair Family Legal Counsel. A hush had settled across the room, but the windows were cracked just enough to carry voices through. She didn't sign. Miles's voice was tight, like he didn't expect resistance, but hated the sound of it. Evelyn answered, low and clipped. "It doesn't matter. We used the guardianship clause. Parental authority stands under the Retroactive Protection Act. Her name's been pulled from the official register. No Harper Sinclair exists in public record. The property transfers are secure." A pause, then we make the narrative final, Miles said. She left. Voluntarily, that's what the world will believe. Harper took a shaky step back, heart slamming against her ribs. Her fingers gripped the clipboard like a lifeline. Then she turned and collided with someone coming down the adjacent hallway, a young woman holding a silver tray of espresso cups. Their eyes met. Harper blinked, startled. The woman's mouth parted slightly. It was Becca Rawlins. In an instant, the tray lowered. Becca glanced around. No one was watching. She leaned in just enough to whisper, "They told me you'd signed, but I saw the real form. I kept it." Harper's breath caught. "I wasn't sure what they were doing," Becca added quickly, "but I knew something was off. You never came back for the ring, and they asked me to say you had. I still have the original license, unmarked, unsigned, hidden." Harper's fingers brushed Becca's wrist, the one that had once fastened a serpent bracelet around her own. "Where I wrote it down." Becca pulled a folded napkin from her apron, scribbled quickly, then pressed it into Harper's palm. "I'll get it to you, but you can't let them know we spoke." Harper nodded, breath shaking, then turned back down the hall, quickening her steps. The voices in the glass room grew distant behind her, but the truth in her chest grew sharper. She wasn't erased. Not yet. Outside, the van sat where she'd left it. The back was closed. She circled to the driver's side and froze. The door was open. On the driver's seat lay a phone, Ethan's. Its screen was shattered, splintered like a spider web. Wires peeked out from the seam where the casing had been forced. No sign of him, no sound. Just the engine ticking faintly from having cooled. Harper backed away slowly, clutching the napkin in one hand and the silence in the other, both tighter than her breath. The morning air in Washington, D.C., was thick with humidity as Harper approached the Eastern District Court of Appeals. The imposing neoclassical facade loomed ahead, its marble columns casting long shadows across the steps. She clutched her bag tightly, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. As she neared the entrance, two men in plain clothes stepped into her path. "Miss Sinclair," one asked, his tone polite but firm. "We need you to come with us to verify some information." Harper's eyes narrowed. "I don't think so," she replied, attempting to sidestep them, but they blocked her path, their expressions unyielding. A third man emerged from a black sedan parked nearby. He wore a tailored gray suit and carried an air of authority. "Miss Sinclair," he said smoothly, "I'm a legal representative for the Sinclair family. There's no need for a scene. Let's discuss this privately." Harper took a step back, her voice rising. I have nothing to discuss with you. I'm here to see my attorney. The man sighed, glancing around. Please, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. We can resolve everything quietly. Thou. Harper's gaze shifted to the security camera mounted above the courthouse entrance. She raised her voice, ensuring it would be captured. These men are detaining me against my will. I am Harper Sinclair, and I have not signed any documents relinquishing my rights. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Among them, a uniformed police officer approached, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. Is there a problem here? He asked. The man in the gray suit produced a business card. We're handling a private family matter, nothing for you to be concerned about. City experiences, me. The officer examined the card, then looked at Harper. Ma'am, are you okay? No. Harper replied, They're trying to force me into a car. I don't know these men. The officer's demeanor shifted. Gentlemen, I'm going to need to see some identification and any legal documents you have authorizing this action. The men hesitated, exchanging glances. We don't have the paperwork on us. One admitted. Then I'm going to have to ask you to step back and leave the premises. The officer said firmly, Now. Grumbling, the men retreated to their vehicle and drove off. The officer turned to Harper. Do you need assistance getting inside? Harper nodded, her legs trembling. Yes, please. Inside the courthouse, she was directed to a waiting area where she could contact her attorney. As she sat down, her phone vibrated with a new message. It was from Becca. I have the original document. Meet me at Pier 3 at 7 p.m. Be careful. Harper's fingers hovered over the screen, her mind racing. She typed a quick reply. Understood. See you then. The day passed slowly as Harper waited for her attorney, her thoughts consumed by the morning's events. When he finally arrived, they discussed the next steps and the importance of the document Becca possessed. With renewed determination, Harper prepared to leave for the meeting. As she stepped outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the city. She made her way toward the waterfront, the anticipation building with each step. Upon reaching the designated pier, she scanned the area, looking for Becca. The water lapped gently against the dock, and the air was filled with the scent of salt and seaweed. She spotted a figure standing at the end of the pier, silhouetted against the fading light. Harper approached cautiously, her heart pounding. The figure turned, revealing Becca's familiar face. You came, Harper said, relief washing over her. Becca nodded, holding out an envelope. This is it. The original document. Keep it safe. Harper took the envelope, her hands trembling. Thank you, she whispered. As they stood there, a sudden noise behind them caused both women to turn. A group of men approached, their intentions unclear. Harper clutched the envelope tightly, ready to defend it at all costs. The men stopped a few feet away, one of them stepping forward. Miss Sinclair, we need to talk. Harper's eyes narrowed. About what? Your inheritance, the man replied, and the consequences of your actions. Harper reached Dock 3 on the Potomac just before 7 p.m., wrapped in her long brown coat, a baseball cap shielding half her face. The river stretched out gray and quiet, the surface pulsing gently under a sky smeared with rain. She stood still, watching the shimmer of faraway headlights blur along the waterline. Every few seconds, she glanced behind her, nothing but fog and wooden planks creaking beneath her boots. 10 minutes late, Becca appeared hood up, hair damp, clutching a large yellow envelope to her chest like a child holding secrets. Her face was pale, lips pressed tight. Without speaking, she held out the folder. Harper took it, hands steady. Becca leaned in, her voice barely audible. Inside, unfiled marriage cert, unsigned agreement, copy of your birth certificate, the original one, with your name. Harper opened her mouth, but Becca shook her head. Don't thank me. Don't contact me. Evelyn. She's not afraid of court. She's afraid of exposure. Harper nodded once. Becca walked off fast, disappearing into the low mist like she'd never been there. Harper tucked the envelope beneath her coat, pulse rising. Back at the rented room where Jesse was camped out with monitors and maps, Harper laid out the documents. Jesse scanned the top page, whistled low. It's all here. This undoes everything they built. His voice turned grim. But we still don't have Ethan. Jesse pointed at a tracker on his screen. Last ping from his phone came from an abandoned rail depot south of Manassas. A warehouse. Quiet area. No police chatter. Harper didn't hesitate. They left immediately. It was nearly midnight when they reached the warehouse, an old corrugated tin structure, sagging at the sides, swallowed by shadows and weeds. The air smelled like rust and motor oil. The front door hung ajar. Harper pushed it open slowly. Darkness inside, thick and cold. Jesse stayed behind to watch the car. Harper took slow steps, the echo of her boots swallowed by the wet concrete. She passed a row of oil drums, a rusted-out rail cart, and then faintly heard it. A thud, then a strained voice. Don't. Come closer. She froze. Ethan light flooded the corridor, bright, blinding. From the far end, Evelyn stood perfectly still, her silhouette sharp in the glare. She wore a dark coat lined in fur, lips red as fresh ink. In her right hand, she held a folded letter. In the left, a remote. I warned you, she said calmly. You keep digging. You find things not meant to be found. Harper didn't speak. She stepped forward, drawing the envelope from inside her coat. You think paper will undo what's already erased. Evelyn's voice didn't rise, but her grip on the letter tightened. You were never supposed to exist. Your name was a liability, a reminder. We removed it to protect the family, and you just keep crawling back. Harper raised the envelope, holding Evelyn's gaze. It's not about the name. It's about who gave it to me, and you don't get to decide who I am. Evelyn stepped closer. I don't need courts. I don't need public sympathy. I have leverage. I can end you with a whisper. Harper didn't move, didn't flinch. Then whisper. I'm still here, behind Evelyn. A faint sound cut through the distant whoop of sirens, growing louder. Evelyn's eyes flicked sideways, only for a second, and then she was gone. By the time Harper reached the far wall, Evelyn had slipped through a side exit. All that remained was Ethan, tied to a support beam, bruised but conscious. His voice came low. Did you get your name back? She didn't answer. She just reached for the rope. The courtroom smelled of old wood and paper heavy. Still, and watching. Harper sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a white button-down shirt pressed smooth, sleeves rolled to the wrist, as if every inch of her now demanded clarity. Jesse leaned close and whispered something about the process, but she barely heard him. The envelope rested in front of them, the seal broken, the truth bared. And still, it didn't feel finished, not until she stood up and told it. The clerk called her name, not a number, not a case title, just her name, Harper Sinclair. Her breath caught. She rose, her legs steady despite the tremor in her gut, and walked down the center aisle. As she passed the benches, eyes followed her, some curious, some cautious, one camera flash briefly flickering and gone. Across the aisle, Miles sat in a charcoal suit, expression locked like stone. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. To his left, their legal team whispered in tight circles, papers shuffling with urgency. But Evelyn's seat front row, marked with her name, was empty. Harper reached the stand, raised her right hand, swore in, and then looked out at the room. I'm not here for revenge, she began. Her voice was soft but traveled. I'm not here to undo what's been done. I just want the truth acknowledged. She told them everything, from the night she was pulled from the ceremony preparations, to waking up in a car with no phone, no memory of how she got there. The days lost in hospitals, shelters, and silence. The slow uncovering of erased files, the folder from Becca, the confrontation in the warehouse. She didn't dramatize. She didn't cry. Each word landed with the weight of having lived through it. I was treated like a name that could be deleted. But I'm not a line on a ledger. I'm a person. And I was never lost. I was hidden. One of the Sinclair lawyers tried to object, citing contractual terms and guardianship clauses, but the judge leaned forward, brows drawn. She's standing in front of us, breathing, testifying. You don't erase someone's existence because they make your numbers inconvenient. The room held still. Harper lowered her eyes for a second. When she looked up, her voice came quieter, but sharper. All I ask is my name back. I'm not asking for their apology. I'm not asking for their acceptance. I'm asking to be real again. A pause followed, a long one. Then the judge looked down at the folder Jesse had submitted. We find sufficient grounds to open a rehearing. The documents presented show signs of coercion. The registration of legal identity under Harper Sinclair is hereby restored until due process is completed. Harper closed her eyes briefly, not to cry, to breathe. Outside, the sunlight had dimmed behind a haze of cloud. Reporters buzzed at the gates, but kept back as ordered. Jesse stayed behind to speak with the court liaison. Ethan waited near the stairs, a quiet figure against the railing. As Harper stepped down, a man she didn't recognize approached, gray coat, no expression. He held out a plain envelope. Your father, he said. Mr. Robert Sinclair. He wants to meet alone. She didn't take it at first, then slowly reached out. The paper was warm from his hand. He walked away without waiting. The house in Chevy Chase stood quiet against the winter air, its sharp roof lines blurred under a dusting of snow. Harper had never seen it in this light still, soft, no trace of the iron silence that once hovered like a shadow. She stepped inside alone. No Jesse, no Ethan, just her, a hallway of polished wood, and the slow mechanical whir of a wheelchair moving somewhere beyond the paneled doors. Robert Sinclair sat by the window, a wool blanket across his knees, his hands folded in a way that seemed too deliberate. Outside, the garden lay frozen, branches bent under the weight of January. When Harper entered, he didn't turn, just said, "They told me you wouldn't come back. They were wrong." His voice was thinner than she remembered, but not hollow. The pause that followed felt longer than it was, because neither of them had words that could bridge the years between now and the last time they'd spoken. "I didn't come for them," Harper answered, "or for you." "I know," he said, still not looking at her, "but I have something for you, something they couldn't erase." He reached into the side drawer of the desk beside him and held out a small silver USB drive, wrapped in an old silk handkerchief. She took it without a word. "I recorded it," he said. "The night Evelyn told me what she planned. She thought she owned me because of the shares. And maybe she did. But I kept the only proof that might outlast her power. I knew one day you'd come back." Harper nodded. She didn't thank him, not because she wasn't grateful, but because gratitude would have felt like forgiving too soon. Still, she held the drive like it weighed more than it looked. Later that afternoon, she sat in the chambers of the presiding judge alongside Jesse and a court liaison while the audio file played. Robert's voice was there, hesitant, restrained, and then Evelyn's, calm and assured, talking of legal removal, signature by substitution, and final silence by any means necessary. It wasn't enough for prison, not yet. But it was enough to shift the ground beneath their case. Harper signed the form to submit the recording as supplemental evidence. Ethan, now mostly recovered, waited in the hallway when she stepped out. His face held that same tired steadiness, the kind that came from sleepless nights and watching someone you care about fight ghosts. He walked beside her down the courthouse steps. "If you get it all back," he asked quietly, "what will you do?" She didn't answer right away. They stood near the edge of the parking lot, the cold pressing through her coat. She looked past the cars, toward the street, where people crossed with coffee cups and briefcases, unaware of the storm that had just shifted course. "I'll return it," she said finally. "All of it. I don't want anything built on being erased." 2 weeks later, in the final hearing. She wore the same white shirt she had when she first testified, clean, clear, unbranded. She stood as the judge read out the reinstatement of her full legal identity, all records amended, all claims re-examined. Then she rose again, no prompt, no script, just a woman standing in a room full of history and choosing how her chapter would close. "I reject all inheritance and controlling shares from the Sinclair estate," she said, voice steady. "I do so not as a condition of peace, but as an affirmation of self. This is not refusal out of bitterness. This is clarity. I'm not what they built. I'm what they tried to silence." The judge nodded. The courtroom murmured. Outside, as reporters circled the exit, Evelyn waited at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Her coat was perfect, her eyes sharp. "You think you've won?" she asked coldly. "You walked away from everything. You've got nothing now." "What does a woman with nothing win?" Harper didn't answer right away. She stepped past her, chin lifted, eyes forward. Then she stopped just long enough to say without turning, "I don't need anything to know who I am." The air in Blue Ridge had a weightless kind of clarity that Harper had forgotten the world could carry. It had been 3 months since the final court hearing. 3 months since she'd stood before a judge and chose to walk away from everything that once defined her, reclaimed the only thing that mattered, her name, and gave up the rest. The little repair shop where Ethan had worked for years now had a hand-painted sign hanging crookedly above the entrance, "The Lost and Found." The paint still looked too fresh, the brush strokes too unsure, but that was part of its charm. Harper's idea, half bakery, half garage, all heart. In the mornings, she woke early and baked. She didn't measure much. She went by feel, flour dust in the air, butter under her nails, cinnamon lingering in the sleeves of her old flannel. In the evenings, Ethan rolled out from beneath trucks with grease across his knuckles, and they'd meet in the middle somewhere between oven heat and motor oil. They didn't talk much about what had happened. It was there, of course, hanging in the corners of rooms, in the eyes of people who recognized her from the news. But in this town, people gave space, a nod, a glance, a small act of letting things settle. That afternoon, the light hit the mountains in gold. The wind carried the first scent of October. Harper stepped out onto the front porch of the cafe, carrying a ceramic mug with both hands, still warm from the pot. There, at the edge of the wooden railing, sat an elderly woman reading a worn paperback. She wore a mustard scarf and boots that had seen decades. Harper held out the cup, wordlessly. The woman looked up, gave a quiet smile, then reached for it. "You live here now?" the woman asked. Harper nodded. "Funny. I thought you looked like someone who'd run from places like this." "I used to," Harper said gently. "Now I run to them." The woman sipped. Name Harper hesitated, then smiled. "Harper," she said. "Just Harper." The woman seemed to take that in. She set her book aside. "That's a whole name, you know. Strong enough to stand on its own." Harper didn't answer right away. She glanced toward the garage where Ethan was wiping his hands on an old towel. He hadn't noticed her watching, or maybe he had, and just didn't make a show of it. That was the kind of man he was, quiet in his steadiness. He looked up at last, caught her gaze, held it. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened, like something deep inside her finally made peace with standing still. Inside the cafe. The bell over the door jingled as a teenager walked in, asking if they still had any of the peach cobbler left. Harper turned slightly, nodded over her shoulder. "Check the counter. It's probably still warm." Then she looked back to the porch. The woman had returned to her book, sipping slowly, letting the pages turn in the hush of the breeze. Harper leaned on the railing. No gold bracelet, no designer coat. Just the sun, the wind, a hand-built sign, and the scent of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen. There were no headlines now, no courtrooms, no steps to descend beneath cameras. Just this an ordinary afternoon, a name that belonged to her again, and a life she chose with both hands. She didn't say anything more. She just stepped off the porch, her head held high. There's a kind of silence that doesn't ache, it just settles, like warm light through old windows. That's the quiet Harper chose, not to forget, not to erase, but to live without hiding. People still whispered sometimes, but she stopped listening for permission. And maybe that's what it means to come home not to a place, but to yourself, somewhere out there. Stories just like hers go unnoticed. But maybe, tonight, someone is watching the sky and finally letting go.